BLM actually set aside land at Powerhouse for possible connection with Sand Flats. And I met with the developer today to make sure, or not make sure, but request his willingness to work with the Trail Mix Committee. And as mentioned earlier today, trails go in pieces. And this is the perfect opportunity to do another link. And his willingness was 100%. He did comment he's working with Mill Creek Village to address their concerns. And I just wanted to say that our meeting was excellent and cooperative and wanting to make sure that everybody got their needs addressed. And so we as the Rotarians in trying to finish this trail, we're kind of excited that we're going to get another link. And as you in the city know, you paid for the bridge over Mill Creek from Rotary Park to go into LaSalle Road as part of this path. And so a lot of that infrastructure is already in place. And I just want to speak that I think the developer is, his mindset, their mindset is to be cooperative and make sure everybody points are well taken. Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Joe.
you.
Thank you, Joe. And thank you for all your efforts for this pathway. Excellent.
Joyce? Now's your chance.
I'm Joyce Victor. I lived by Powerhouse Lane for 60 years.
Ma'am,
I don't want to.
we have to, it's for the public record. Sorry.
Sorry, I know, it's not the
You can-
most
you can-
comfortable
I don't
format.
like talking with.
So you can hold it up and turn around and speak to
I
him.
would love to do that.
Great.
She likes an audience.
No, I don't. But I want to be heard. I had land across from the Powerhouse Lane Road for 60 years. I just sold it and we put in a subdivision. Affordable housing. It was a work project. In fact, there's a woman here that participated in that, or did Emily? Raise your hand. They have beautiful homes. I didn't see you, I'm sorry. Oh, yes, they're affordable. So young people in their 30s have now got beautiful homes that they can live in. The city charged me $17,000 to put a sidewalk in because they were going to put sidewalks the whole length clear up to Mill Creek. I said, this is wonderful. As yet, I haven't seen a sidewalk. And if they're going to have a subdivision this large with our subdivision right across the street, they need to have some sidewalks. These lanes, bicycle lanes, are dangerous. I sat out there for one solid week on the corner as people come down the road walking. And I said, beautiful sidewalk. Why aren't you walking down the sidewalk? Oh, it's too much of a hassle. We're in the bike lane up at the top. Why do we have to all of a sudden walk over and get on the sidewalk? And I said, because it's safer, especially when you're walking down the road with a bunch of little kids on bicycles, little bikes, little cars now they've got. All right. That's one thing that I think is a necessary thing along that Mill Creek Road.
Ma'am, please watch your time.
Okay.
Allison,
Oh,
I've
I
got it.
didn't pull it over. I'm sorry. I'll
You
hurry.
have 1 minute left.
Okay. I agree. That road is too narrow. I've lived with Potato Salad Hill for 60-odd years. And I've had people come into my yards, leave their garbage, and say, knock on my door and say, gee, we had a lot of fun in your park. And I said, no, that's not my park. That's my front yard. I had a man drive into my driveway I have double doors. I live on the first condo coming into our subdivision. And he parked in front of my parking spot, and I walked up to him and I said, sir, you can't park there. I'm 86 years old. If I have a heart attack and I want to drive myself to the hospital, I can't get there unless I plow through your car. And you know what he did to me? That's what his answer was.
Ma'am.
Okay. I just want to say one thing. If they do this establishment, I hope you make it so that it's not wood-burning stoves, because in that area, if they all have burning stoves with wood, then we won't be able to breathe.
Thank you. John? John? Are you?
Hi, my name's John Gould. I'm a member of the Water Conservation Board, but I'm speaking for myself tonight, not the board. I've read Ken Combs' water budget report. I've read the USGS report on our groundwater here. I'm also a professional geologist, and I'm extremely concerned. I wonder if there's been any determination at all as to whether or not this development will affect our aquifer. Will it deplete our aquifer? Does anyone know?
We can answer that afterwards. Our city engineer is here, so he can chat about that. But certainly, their feeling is that there's adequate water for the subdivision. The water will come from Moab water, and then the sewer is Grand Canyon.
Well, I understand that there's water available right now, but Ken Combs' report says we are depleting our aquifer. We're mining our aquifer. When you go home tonight, I recommend that you Google Cedar City and groundwater. What you're going to read there is the future of Moab if we do not smarten up and check out this groundwater before we build these developments. The county has 500 more housing units planned, 250 apartment buildings planned, and now 100 units here. We need to know about our groundwater before we do this stuff, not after. When we find out that we have a groundwater problem in this town, it's going to be too late to conserve our way out of this. We're going to end up like Cedar City, and I hope we don't. Please, folks, determine how much groundwater we have before you okay these developments. Thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Richard?
Thank you.
If you want to hand them to me, we can pass them.
Okay, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Richard Cook, and I think it's on. Oh, it is. Okay.
You just have to get close.
Yeah. As a former member of the Planning Commission, I want to thank all the members for the hard work that they do. I know this is not easy and takes a lot of time. So I've submitted a couple of photographs just to show these areas that are like the creek over at Cinnamon Court and down towards the Nature Conservancy, where we both had fires, and it's a typical story. Kids in areas like this and matches, you just can't keep them out. So at any rate, that's why we're so concerned about evacuation, and this goes on up Powerhouse Lane as well, towards the canyon, where we get an enormous number of visitors. And this is something that at some point, these Russian olive thickets can burn, and they are just an enormous conflagration. So that's why emergency access is such a hot topic for the residents here. Also, I want to reiterate my critique of the traffic impact analysis that the developer supplied as being inadequate on a number of levels. I think with an area like Mill Creek Drive, Powerhouse Lane accessing Mill Creek Canyon, and that being the largest public amenity here in the tourism for Grand County, Moab, we really need and there's no way of knowing if there will ever be another designated access up there. The BLM could, instead of parking 35 cars and calling that adequate, they could enlarge that parking lot. That is something that is currently being debated, but it does affect the safety of this subdivision and the ability to evacuate Mill Creek Canyon of potentially up to 500, 600 people, and all of the the 100 homes, which I'd like to mention, 70 of those homes are going to be eligible for an ADU. So what really needs to happen with the traffic impact analysis is you need to double all of those 70 homes to indicate that 2 families could be living on every one lot. So all those 72 lots are really, as I understand city code, allowed to have an accessory dwelling unit. And probably the way the real estate market is here right now, many of these homes will be purchased by people who don't actually live here. They will build an accessory dwelling unit and rent out the house, or they'll rent out both of them when they're not here. So that is something that really needs to be taken into consideration, not only in this development, which is the largest single subdivision I believe that Moab has had to approve here in, well, certainly in the last decade or two. I can't think of another one of this scale. So you have to really plan for what the current market is, and the market is build an accessory dwelling unit because it is a cash cow. So, I would like to ask if the 2 other intersections will be submitted to the same level of improvements as Powerhouse Lane, because they are going to get significant traffic. So they need turning lanes. Really, this whole area is going to need to be widened, because if they don't have turning lanes, they're going to be a traffic hazard. So please take that into account.
Thank you. Thank you.
Curtis?
No, I
Oh. Emma?
Most of my questions have been answered, but I have the same concerns, which is traffic. obviously. Emma, would you mind stating your name and then turning a timer over, please? Which one, anyone?
Anyone.
Pick a color.
Purple, yay, my kind of girl.
My name is Emma Tejada. I live in Bonita Lane, so right across the street. I'm actually excited about the development and housing, so I have all the same concerns. How many low-income housing is there going to be? What is it giving to the people that live here year round? What are we going to be able to, I mean, obviously not all of it, but that's it, you know, we all want people to have houses. Traffic, it's a busy street anyways. Where are they coming in? So on Memorial Day, literally the right hand of that subdivision was all cars. So where is that gonna go when the subdivision goes in? So planning for that is important. I'd like to know how far the setback is going to be on Mill Creek Drive, because we're not just thinking about this subdivision. We have a college going in, and that Mill Creek is gonna be the main side road for that college. And so we have to think bigger as a city as what the roads are gonna need and what we can do to really look forward in planning the roads. I think my last question was, the bike path. Obviously, bike paths are important. It's been talked about a lot. I think a bike path through the open space would be awesome. Connecting to our bike path on Bonita Street, hopefully connecting into Hecla, and just bringing it all around, all the way up to Sand Flats. So that's about it. But the
Thank you.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you.
Those are all the sheets I have. Is there anybody else that would like to chime in here while so if you could fill out a green sheet for me real quick, we'll get you up here.
I could just tell you a story while we're waiting. A few years back,
Ma'am, he's ready.
Can I fill this out? Poster?
Sure.
Just to,
And
my
you're,
name is Charles Bachman, 1146 Bonita Street, just across from the subdivision. Two quick questions. One, I'm slightly concerned that me and my neighbor did not receive notice of this meeting. I only got this from a coworker who lives around the street. The other concern I have is, what is our plan going forward as far as delegating commercial and residential as far as nightly rentals in said communities like this? How are we going to prevent the, I guess, the perversion of another neighborhood? And that's all I have. Thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you.
And Audrey?
Hi, I'm Audrey Graham, and I'm just interested, since I haven't heard anything about the economy of the area or the economics of the subdivision, which isn't really anything to do with you guys, I realize. But when we're concerned about the water of the area, I just want to say that that's another reason, in my mind, to make sure that there is definitely affordability for people who are already in this area, serving this area, working as our neighbors, working as our servers and all of our nurses and everything else. So we've all heard that again and again, but when we are short on water and we need to be careful how we use it, I think inviting many, many more people to come here, part-time, full-time, well, especially part-time and then go away or whatever, is not the best use of that water. It's better to use it for people who are already here, already working, and give them housing that they can afford. Thanks.
Thanks, Audrey.
Thank you.
Thank you.
the rain, when we ran out of water,
Come on up, sir.
we couldn't flush our toilets. And then everybody says, oh, don't worry about water, well, we are worried about it.
One of the older residents of Grand County.
Could you state your name, please?
D. Tranter, I live across the street from this on Pear Tree Lane. I'm concerned about two things. One is water. I remember before Ken's Lake was built, when we had water restrictions in Moab. And well, that's just a concern. Let me, the other concern I have is we have not enough egress. And I'm looking at I think we need to have another road coming out to the main highway on the north edge of this plot. Is there
That's planned, yeah.
Yeah, that is planned.
Okay. All right. Okay. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Dee.
Okay. If there's not anybody else, I'd like to close the, whoops, got one more?
One more.
Two more. And again, state your name and hold the timer up.
Purple.
Thank you.
My name is Elena. I live on Dream Drive. My question is, what is being done, if anything, to protect the water quality of Mill Creek by this community?
Thank you. Thanks, Elena.
Yep, thank you.
Maurice?
Hi, good evening. My name is Maurice Miller, and I'm just here to share a suggestion. If you notice on the right side, I heard a comments about, the road and safety and so on. What if on the right side becomes like the section where people go in? Because like when Mill Creek really gets packed, there's not a lot of parking space, and like I believe Ms. Emma mentioned that people park all the way in the middle, and then if we're gonna build more things there, then there's parking there, then it could get clustered. So if possible, what if the developers think about making the right side a section where it could be additional parking, it could be like a little walkway or something like that. Just something to think about. And the middle part, it should be just open up specifically for people who live up there already, and not make more traffic just going up that way. So it's just a suggestion for you guys to think about. I think this might be the only time I can share that. So.
Maurice, do you mean where the cul-de-sac is
Yeah,
now?
the cul-de-sac.
Okay.
Yeah, I know it's going to cause redesign and so on, but it's probably a way that we can all work together. It's great that there's housing, glad that there's possibly affordable housing and so on. I'm grateful for Moab. I'm fortunate to have a house through a wonderful program, Community Rebuild. So that hopefully this suggestion is a way that could help take care of a few needs that were mentioned tonight.
Thank you,
Maurice.
How close is the entrance on the southern end to the curb? From Cinema Court. That's a bad curb.
Certainly, our city engineer will review that and make sure that it doesn't create an unsafe situation.
All the people coming out of Cinema Court, all the people coming out of our
I understand.
section, and then out of this section. And you know what I've noticed also?
Joyce.
All of the big trucks are using Mill Creek now.
Thank you. I'd like to close the public hearing at 7:07. Does the developer have any comments now that you've heard the questions and concerns of the public? Would you have anything to add at this point?
Yeah, now's your time.
Please state your name.
My name is Jeff Pillis. I'm with Cent Engineering. We listened very carefully to all the comments, and we also, from Laura, received these comments ahead of time as they came in. She forwarded them to us.
Got to talk right into
We're
it.
having mic issues. Sorry,
Right
everybody.
into it. Okay.
Yeah, really right into it and loud.
Did you get what I said so far?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we've taken careful notes, listened to everybody in the room, everyone who spoke, and it sounded like traffic came up several times. And I think there's a big misunderstanding about how traffic studies are done. It is completely normal and acceptable to do traffic counts any time of the year. And what they do is have the FHW, with the Federal Highway Administration, and DOT, sometimes they have their own standards, but they're adjusted for both seasonal changes. If you do counts in October and you have peaks in June, for instance, those numbers are adjusted for June. But also, traffic is not designed based on the 1% or the special events. So traffic improvements are designed for the 85th percentile. So that means that 85% of the time, there won't be any significant delays, and there won't be significant stacking at intersections. So, I mean, that's just traffic studies 101. So they are adjusted for both seasonal and days of the week, and we've done both of them for this traffic study. In addition, we listened to some of the comments about ADUs, and the original traffic study didn't address ADUs, but it also had all the traffic on one access point. We've since then added 2 more access points and counted up 100% of the single-family lots and ran the same traffic numbers as if every single-family lot had an occupied ADU by a family. So running all the traffic all together, 100% occupied, peak hour, no additional improvements are triggered on Mill Creek Drive. So it really wouldn't change anything with the layout. What a traffic study does is identify improvements necessary to allow the safe and efficient flow of traffic. So it was done absolutely by the book as far as how traffic studies need to be done. It's not an opinion. It's basically you plug in your numbers and it cranks out an answer. And then there's standards that say if you have so many right turns per hour, it triggers a right turn lane, for instance. So this development does trigger a left turn decel lane in at Powerhouse Lane, and that is designed and proposed. We've also checked site distance. I heard site distance come up late in the game there, but we did check site distance at all the intersections, and we've been working with Chuck Williams on that as well.
Did you include busing?
Joyce, I am going to have to ask you to be quiet.
When we started the planning process for this development, first thing we did was look at Mill Creek Village and say, we want to do something that complements and expands on the concept that's already been started here. So at a glance, looking at the plan, it is very similar to Mill Creek Village. We're doing a few extra things. The roads in this development are actually wider. There's parallel parking on both sides of every road, including Powerhouse Lane for its full length. So that should actually allow more parking and better access. We've discussed 3 access points. The northern access point will also be a full movement or full width intersection. So emergency vehicles will have 3 different points to access at least the western part of Powerhouse Lane. We also added an emergency access from the cul-de-sac. You'll see in the upper right-hand side of the drawing that if something were to happen blocking Powerhouse Lane completely, at the intersection to the west of that, if there were an accident, you could still access with emergency vehicles to get to Mill Creek Village or the canyon. The trail alignment through the development was included in the original City Trails Master Plan. So we tried to, we were required to put in a trail, but we also wanted to have a functional trail system. So we agreed to connect over to the southwest corner over by, in there, and also connect that over to the creek. It's smart development to also use green space as water infiltration areas. So what we have is dispersed water infiltration areas. Instead of doing one pond with a concrete outlet structure that pipes the water to the creek, we have decentralized systems so that we have a series of small infiltration areas so that allows that water to naturally percolate into the fairly porous soils that we have here. I said porous soils that we have here. And then that trail connection also connects to the river, and we're going to use that as well to discharge water. But those green spaces are designed as big, flat, wide areas to allow that water to spread out, slow down, soak in. So we're trying to minimize also piping water directly from a street to the river. So we're trying to protect water quality as well.
Can I ask a question? Did I understand that you...
No, sir.
I can't ask a question?
Not during this period.
Oh,
please. You guys can certainly discuss after.
Sidewalks are proposed on both sides of every road through the subdivision, including Powerhouse Lane. Like I said, the trail connection was required to connect to the Mill Creek Village Trail. We're not opposed to modifying that alignment if the city wishes to do it, but I think that instruction would have to come from the city because that's what we were told to do from the city. Additionally, the trail, if you were to use that trail to come out and enter Mill Creek Village, there's a sidewalk that runs along Dream Drive up to Powerhouse Lane. That's the intended trail alignment, and that's why there's a raised crossing there on Mill Creek Drive, or I'm sorry, on Powerhouse Lane. So you're supposed to cross Powerhouse Lane at that raised crossing, and then use the sidewalk on the other side, which will be constructed as part of this development to access the canyon. So there would be an off-street access, although you do need to cross one road.
To clarify, sidewalks in the development, it's fairly hard to see just because of the level of detail.
Again, it's a preliminary submittal.
Yeah,
The
for
final
sure.
submittal will have a ton more.
But there are sidewalks all along
Every
Powerhouse Lane.
street, both sides.
Okay, that's what I thought. We had some concern about that.
And speaking of that, are there sidewalks on Mill Creek right now?
No, but we're going to put one entire frontage of Mill Creek.
And that's going to be the firm that's going to be your construction company, or?
Yep. We designed it.
You designed it? Do you pay for it?
They'll pay for it as well.
Down Mill Creek?
Down Mill Creek Drive, yep.
Great.
I mean, well, some of the other comments were about nightly rentals. Obviously, we don't have much control over that.
We do, so we're good.
So I'll address that in a minute.
Sure. think that answered the comments. I did hear the comment at the end from Mr. Miller about the right side and additional parking. And again, that's one of the things that we considered when we were looking at roads, considering doing PUDs and reduced road widths. Wider, straighter roads increase speeds. So we tried to introduce curves where we could to slow traffic down a little bit. Obviously, we have some constraints and some parking requirements. So we're trying to balance parking with speeds. We're trying to naturally control speed so they don't have to have law enforcement out there, but provide as much parking as we can because we know that's a sensitive thing. But parking's another thing that you don't design parking based on Jeep Safari Weekend and stacking. You design it for the 85th percentile and accommodate what you can most of the time. But there are times when you would have to walk a little further, park a little further away.
Is there going to be a chance to ask them questions?
This format is really not set up for that, but certainly after the meeting, if you want some further questions.
Hearing what's going on, it could be valuable to
Sure.
the planning.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, Allison and I can talk about that, but they are hearing your input, and then they'll have an opportunity to discuss it. And I don't know what they're planning to do this evening, but
Just as I'm listening, I'm thinking of questions that I could be asking you guys that really
write them
concern
down.
us.
Write them down, and then we'll try to address them.
Also, to be clear, this is preliminary plat, so we'll have
Right.
at least another round of revisions to accommodate additional changes and tweaks as requested.
And will there be public review of that? Will there be another public?
I don't know.
There will not be another public hearing.
There will not be another formal public hearing, but at all of our meetings, we have opportunity for public input.
Will we be informed of another hearing?
No. So there's not a mailed notice that's required for a public meeting, but it is in the newspaper and it's posted at City Hall. So there is information about the meetings, and we'll just see what the Planning Commission decides to do about moving forward.
Another question, is it ever required? Is it ever required to have a public meeting to mail out the notice?
We did this time. Everyone within 300 feet.
No.
Well, I can't tell you what the tax rolls say for your parcel, but we look at the latest tax rolls and send them out to people within 300 feet, and we always get them back. Well, maybe they're not within 300 feet, but we do require notice.
Can you make sure Bonita Street is involved in the
Okay.
There is a majority of the street not receive a notice, and we are going to take property.
If your property is not within 300 feet of the property boundary lines, you would not receive a mail.
Ladies and gentlemen,
But
we
you found out about it, and you are here at the meeting,
and
giving your
ladies and
public
gentlemen, we
input.
can
We
double
appreciate
check that. Okay, Amy.
I'm Amy Weiser. I work with Business Resolutions. I just had one point I wanted to discuss. It was brought up by Jim Collard and also a few other folks about the Mill Creek Collaborative. And we are on the Mill Creek Collaborative. We do go to those meetings. I don't think we've hit all of them, but we've hit most of them. And when we submitted the subdivision back in January, we submitted the subdivision. At one of the Mill Creek Collaborative meetings, I did announce that it was submitted, and we encouraged people to talk to us. Just so you know, no one came and talked to us except for Richard Cook, who did come and talk with us, but he talked about concerns about emergency access as far as moving it to Potato Salad Hill, those kinds of things, but didn't talk to us about our actual subdivision. But just so everyone knows, we are a part of that group, and we've been involved in those discussions. But no one has come and talked to us, the applicant. And then I also wanted to bring up the safety evacuation of Mill Creek Canyon that Richard Cook brought up. Just so everybody knows, the fire department did review this subdivision application, and they did request additional access points, which we have provided. So just so everyone is aware of that.
Amy and Jeff, could you stay up here in case the Planning Commission has any questions for you as we our discussion here. Nora, do you have anything to
Yeah,
add?
a couple points I wanted to address, questions that were brought up. I talked about the trails and liability. Utah does have a statute that sort of indemnifies property owners to a point. And most trails end up crossing private property.
5714-202, if you want to look it up.
Is the citation. What kind of housing? There were questions about what kinds of housing this is. This is in the R2 zone. Nightly rentals are not permitted. ADUs would be permitted for lots over 5,000 square feet, but quite frankly, many of the smaller lots, it just isn't going to fit. These are relatively small lots. They have to meet the setback requirements. And it may occur in some cases, but I would guess not every single lot is going to be able to accommodate an ADU. An ADU, the ADU ordinance was an important ordinance of the City Council in order to provide more affordable housing opportunities, and so they are consistent with the city's goals. These lots, being fairly small in size, I think are targeted towards normal folks like planners and engineers and people like that, so that they will actually be able to buy a piece of property and perhaps build a house on it. It's not big, there are 4 state lots, but other than that, they're really lots and I suspect community rebuilds will end up probably interested in some of the lots because it's similar to the kinds of things they're interested in. So it really is to provide that it provides that sort of missing middle. People want to own a home, but they can't afford a large lot and a big fancy house. So, and there again, nightly rentals will not be allowed. The other thing that came up was dumping a lot of product on the market at once. And it would be worth talking to the applicants about phasing. And I think that we will have a discussion with them as staff about phasing and whether this is all going to come online at once or over a period of time. But that's something that can be discussed. I have a note that I can't read, so I guess I won't address that. Okay, just wanted to clarify those few points.
I have a question. Who's going to be the builder? What's your plan for building?
We don't have a builder at this point.
Your plan is just to sell the lots, is that right?
I'm not going to 100% confirm that.
Okay.
So we may end up selling some of the lots. We may not sell all of the lots. We may design build some of the lots, but it's probably going to be a mixture, but we don't have that totally figured out yet.
Okay, thank you.
Have you been talking to community rebuilds at all about selling some of the lots to them?
We have not talked with community rebuilds at this point, no.
I would just like to remind the developer that the area median income in Moab is around $65,000, and a person earning $65,000 a year can hardly afford a house worth $200,000. So if you could just keep those numbers in mind, if you do plan to build, we would love to see some under $200,000.
So they are not proposing any deed restrictions about affordability, but the nature of the product lends itself to smaller houses.
And that's what we're hoping.
I agree, and not only that, but anytime you build a home and it's purchased by somebody, especially locally, it opens up another home. And it's a wonderful development. I applaud you for that. And the other thing I would like to say is I think that pathway that goes through the subdivision actually creates more safety, because you don't have to go out onto the main area to approach that pathway. You can do it. We have it in several places and it works great. But, I don't think that our pathways are being used enough. It was suggested that they're being used too much. I don't agree. I'd like to see that survey, okay?
Nora, sorry, can you pull this map up again for us?
The other thing I would like to say, or ask, actually, Nora might be able to answer this, but when that goes through the project, is there fencing that's going to be put up alongside that pathway? So if you have a 10-foot wide pathway, is there going to be a 6-foot fence that goes down both ways to kind of protect the residents as it passes through?
Are you asking about in the open space greenway where the
Yes.
storm drainage is? I'll let Jeff speak to that a little bit, but the idea is that it's supposed to be landscaped open space for residents to enjoy and also work for the stormwater infiltration. I don't envision having a fence, but if it's required, we would certainly put a fence up.
I'm not saying, and Nora might know more about that, but the other question I have is, who's paying for the initial pathway?
The developer is going to
Really?
pay for the initial pathway, yeah.
Wow, and then the city takes over?
No, it'll be part of the homeowners association.
Oh, okay.
Responsibility, because this is that green infrastructure that we always hear talked about. The way they're dealing with their drainage in that natural area is an example of green infrastructure.
Okay. But I'd also, if I can still have the floor here, encourage the landscaping. And again, Nora's going to have input on that, but it's been talked about water use. We are using water that's been treated. It's for culinary, for drinking and that kind of thing. I would encourage that we don't put landscaping in that's going to use a whole bunch of that water.
I want to reiterate that. I think the greenway that goes behind the houses where the path goes through, I mean, we have something similar in my neighborhood in the HOA, and half of it is bluegrass and is terrible, and we all hate it and we want it gone, and the other half is native plants and drainage, and there are so many great organizations. Jeff Adams, I can't particularly plug anyone, but there are so many people that Community Rebuilds and other home builders have worked with to have natural drainage features without having grass somewhere. And I know if you're selling individual lots, you can't control what individual lot owners have unless you have an HOA agreement and your CCNR have something like that. That'd be really great, particularly when it's all draining into Mill Creek. It'd be nice to not have lawn chemicals.
Sure.
So,
Yeah, and it's a good point about bringing up irrigation. I mean, irrigation is, domestic water use is a very, very small fraction of the water that you use to irrigate even a small lawn. So, irrigation is low-hanging fruit when it comes to water conservation.
for sure. Yeah, just that center area, it says greenway, and it's nice to have space for kids to play, but there's so many other options now other than grass.
It doesn't necessarily mean bluegrass, yes.
So I have one suggestion for the trail. It looks as though the trail backs up against the properties all along from the north end of Mill Creek Drive, all along the back end of the properties, and then dumps into what on our map here is purple.
Yes.
So here, pathway comes along the back of your properties and then dumps in and ends up on Dream Drive. Would it be that much of a problem just to bring it on back down through the rest of those properties and pass it on to Spanish?
That's already there too, Allison. Did you see that?
Right.
The purple's there.
The purple
Yeah.
is there all the way down here, but I'd like to take it down here, right there, instead of putting it on Dream Drive. That might be an option to help the neighbors on Dream Drive.
And we're not opposed to that. Again, it was actually mandated by the city to do,
To hook
just
in.
for full disclosure, we actually
Okay.
designed Mill Creek Village as well. And we had to put the path in with the future connection through the future property development of this parcel.
Okay.
So, but we're open to suggestions.
Okay.
And
Ma'am,
that-
you cannot.
It's very important.
You'll- then
I have a pathway. I have a pathway that the city promised me that they would take care of.
And so you need to bring that up with the city administration.
City council.
So, yeah, I like that suggestion, Allison, because, the purple, if you look at an aerial, and for the folks that live in that neighborhood, that's there. That path is there and liable to, and will be connected. But if you give someone another place to ride or walk or wherever, so, the only sort of outpoint isn't on Dream Drive, I think that would assuage a lot of concerns about that.
Doesn't it already go down through their tract?
It does. Like that, the whole purple section is a very nice paved pathway that is currently there.
I mean the blue through the middle of Abbey subdivision.
It does.
goes
It
up.
does, but to still have that northern, geez Louise,
Nor you're making us nervous.
still have that northern blue section, it would still connect to the purple, but exactly where Allison said. Yeah, you wanna?
Just follow the edge of the subdivision.
Yeah.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Here, so both pathways would be there, so you
Yeah.
could get to Dream Drive, and if you guys would like to post a nice, pretty little sign that says, "This is leading onto public property," and then this would also be available to get them down onto Powerhouse.
And as I mentioned before, the city council is the only one that has the authority to remove the ability for the public to pass on that thing.
And
on
I
that
would not remove it.
path.
I would just give another
Right.
option.
But right now, it is a public access easement. And not that they won't do that, but it's not that, unfortunately, you guys can't make that decision
No,
today.
I
They have to be
understand, just
involved.
a suggestion.
And I think there's some good rationale to look at that.
Okay.
I think it looks really good. I really like the mixture of the small lots with twin home lots. I think that will offer a lot of housing options for people in Moab, and I think it looks pretty well planned out.
Yeah,
Especially
I agree.
adding that north entrance.
Yeah.
And knowing that the streets are wide enough for parallel parking all throughout the subdivision is good too. I mean, that's
I'm a little
a huge
concerned.
expense to
Sorry, but I'm a little concerned about Powerhouse Lane because it always seems to be too narrow. And I know that it's not your thing. That's the city. But is there going to be curb and gutter up and down and sidewalk up Powerhouse Lane? And are they going to widen that to at least as wide as this subdivision has got it?
It looks like there's sidewalk
here?
all the way up.
He was here.
Chuck?
I saw him.
Chuck?
Yeah, I promised I wouldn't
Decided.
rat him out unless we had a specific question.
But that's actually going to be done as part of this subdivision.
Oh, is
It
it?
would be widened.
Okay,
That was
because you're
Brian's
gonna-
question.
You're going to curve down your side,
Both
right?
sides,
On Powerhouse Lane.
Powerhouse Lane,
And
yeah.
will it widen that road?
slightly, yes.
Slightly, okay.
It'll widen it, it'll provide curb gutter sidewalk on both sides and parallel parking.
Parking on both
That's a huge additive to this.
It is,
That's a very expensive,
yeah, it's not cheap.
not cheap.
Right. Yeah, they're all going to be city street widths.
And everybody benefits from that.
What is that width exactly?
I knew you were going to ask.
Like 50 some odd feet?
No, it's in the 30s, I believe.
That's what I was thinking.
Oh,
Well, the
Just look-
blacktop's 30,
And then the
then you have
sidewalks.
2 and 5, or 3 and 5, or something like that.
I don't remember off the top of my head what that width is, but it's, I think it's called a local street.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess I'll just add, we appreciate you addressing the traffic concerns, and I really do think it's less, like, we know that, for the city for you to even have gotten this far, your traffic study was done correctly, but I would encourage you, at least talking to the public, it's the appearance as much as it is the actual execution of something properly by the letter of the law, and that's half of what we're doing up here, is just making sure that everyone feels heard. And, the concerns about, it's peak, it's not just cheap weekend. Sometimes it's sporadic, sometimes it's weird. And I think if you can err anywhere on the side of maybe you don't have to, by the letter of the law, do something, but going ahead just for the good of the public and to make sure that, things are done when you have the opportunity to, knowing that this is an area that really does see a ton of use, both locally and with visitors. And you're doing that for a lot of other things. So I would just, I guess, caution you where it's like, we know you did the traffic study correctly, but, I don't think that makes a difference at the end of the day with how it feels with the traffic there.
And I'd like to know if the BLM traffic study could be available to us.
Point.
Yeah.
I'm sure
And
theirs
to
is
you
more
as
oriented
well.
toward parking at the trailhead, but just getting back to traffic briefly, you do balance wide streets with speed. When we did Mill Creek Village, one of the main concerns was speeding, so we didn't want to widen it any more than we had to provide adequate infrastructure, and that's why that speed hump is in the middle of it, to try and control some of the speeds, because when you have that straight road, the wider it is, the faster they go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of the neighborhood concerns with the traffic study were just the fact that there were an X number of units going in, not just the street itself or the street with their turn lanes, which is what traffic studies are for. I think it was the overall development that was playing into.
I'd like to compliment your preparedness on a lot of those issues that were brought up, very pinpointing and addressing those pretty succinctly.
Well, Nora was awesome about telling us these concerns came in, be prepared. So she really helped us out.
In addition, as far as the traffic going and being one of the,
Gotta talk right into it.
I don't want
I know.
to get a big squeak.
I think it's mine.
Regarding the traffic, the driving through this area, the sense that this particular plat design will add as far as traffic calming in the studies within planning and the development of the streets, I do believe it'll create a calming effect. So I applaud your effort to design that into this plat.
You know, something that wasn't mentioned is actually the intersection of Powerhouse Lane will be shifted slightly south to align. Oh, I'm sorry, it's to get the max, or an appropriate distance from intersections on the other side of the street, because you want to either be perpendicular
Right.
or a certain distance apart, so you don't have two people turning left at the same
Right.
time. Yeah, so we had to be a certain distance from that, I think it's 150 feet minimum. So it should make that a little bit safer, so you don't have conflicting movements at the intersection.
Yeah, it can't be straight on because there's a well right there.
Right.
I see that.
One additional question as far as the parking. Within the Dream Avenue, I believe, is that what the street is? Dream Drive. The parallel parking, there are amenities that are put into place where there is greenscape, the trees planted on the side. Is that something that might be included in some of this parallel parking?
You know, before this meeting, I went and met with Bijan Riley. He's Andrew Riley's son, and he was integral in laying out Mill Creek Village. And he said if he had to do it again, he probably wouldn't do the landscape islands. But that was, again, the main concern when we were doing that was speeding, not traffic or parking or anything else. But he said they did have a lot of, you know, especially before the trees grew up, the people would just drive through them, you know, and ruin cars. You know, so he said he probably wouldn't do that again.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Commissioners? Any other questions for the developer?
Oh, yeah, what's the crosswalk plan for the trail that connects Bonita Street?
You know, we've been thinking about that. We're wondering if we're going to do another raised crossing. It can be done. If you do too many, they get annoying to drivers, and then drivers slow down, then speed up. So you don't want to do it. Vertical traffic calming is kind of a last resort. You don't want to do any more of it than you have to. It might not be unreasonable to do one there, though.
I don't.
Because
think
it would
it's
be the only one on
unreasonable
the
there.
street.
Yeah.
You what?
I was just saying, I mean, I speed on that section and I don't speed typically. And
But
so.
that's because of the road, yeah.
Yeah, it's because of how the road is, but I think there are so many families living on Bonita and who cross on a regular basis, and I don't think that's gonna that's not gonna change. I mean, man, if ever there were a spot for it.
Coming off the highway, they really take those curves fast.
So is that a recommendation?
We can
Is that a
certainly make that.
recommendation that we have?
Yeah, I mean, now is your time to deliberate, and if you want to request additional information, now's the time to kind of talk about that.
So thank you, Jeff. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff.
So as Nora said, now's the time for us to discuss this and see if we have any concerns, if we have any other questions, or if we are ready to make a motion. Now's when we need to talk.
I guess I'll just open with, I would really like for us to recommend that there's a raised crossing to connect the proposed pedestrian path to the pedestrian path that's behind the Bonita neighborhood across Mill Creek.
I think that's good.
And everyone who bottoms out their car is gonna hate me there, but that's fine.
So remind them it's not 45 right there.
I also support that.
Well, is that going to be right on Mill Creek?
Yeah.
Okay,
It
and that's going to
will.
be right by the pathway?
Yep.
So here.
So,
Purple to blue.
Yeah, purple to blue right here.
okay, so that's going to be a raised area to slow the traffic down. Can't they do something else?
But we're trying to get people across there.
The only thing I can
Well, is
think
there
of,
not gonna be
you could do landscaping, but the way that's set up, it's fields, and coming from the Midwest, if
Well-
it's flat and if it's wide, I'm gonna go really fast.
Okay, but is the speed limit 30?
Yes. And nobody, and I can tell
Nobody
you,
does.
on
Okay,
a bike,
okay,
I
but
can whip
I don't know
through
if,
that.
maybe Chuck can answer that, but
Yeah,
do you put a speed bump in at 30?
You can.
That look. That look. He's already given us the look.
Well, no, I was happy to be up front for a change. Typically not. And one of the things that so if this moves forward, one of the things that we're very interested is in that crossing. And we'll be asking them to do an analysis and work with us to come up with whatever treatment we think will make sense, because we have concerns about it as well. I'm hesitant to say to you, put in a raised speed table, because at 30 miles an hour, it's going to, in my opinion, create more problems than it will. But there are other methods that can be used to address that. And that's one of the concerns that we have, and we have other issues that we'll address as it moves forward, but that one's one that we would.
We can make a more general recommendation that just be a part of their final approval at council level, is something to address pedestrian crossings to those walkways.
We'd be happy with that. We were going to do it as staff, but if you put it in there, that'd be.
Should we put it in as number 8?
Sure.
You certainly
So
can.
how should we word that?
I will sit here and word it while we
Pedestrian
ask other
safety.
questions.
Okay. Even like some metal or concrete cylinders with reflective tape or something around them, just to get your attention, I think would, maybe at both the entrances and in the middle of the street. I don't know.
There are
if
a lot
that's
of, there are a lot of different methods, and I would recommend that you make a condition that says that crossing needs to be addressed to the satisfaction of the city engineer in order to calm traffic on Mill Creek Drive. Something like that.
Or at least draw attention to that pathway.
At least to maximize safety of the crossing. I think
Yes.
is what we're looking for. I'm not sure it's a traffic calming.
Would there be a crosswalk there or no?
Oh, that's one possible treatment. There's a whole design that will go into this.
Just not those flags.
I can tell you that I have never recommended flags. Okay? And won't.
That's the thing when you walk past.
All right, I have a condition now. I will put it in our proposed motion.
Okay. Ladies and gentlemen, anything else we'd like to comment about or ask questions about or need more data on?
I don't think so. I think it looks good.
Mary Ann, Jeanette?
Can I make a motion?
Hang on.
I have to say, I've watched this piece of property for several years and gone through several different people that have actually bought this property. So this property's actually gone through probably 3 people since Andrew Riley had it. And I was really, really, really concerned when I first saw this piece of property and this development. But I think that the developers have actually done their homework. And I actually applaud, and this doesn't come from me very often, but I will applaud the developer on his due diligence and listening to the public and possibly putting the needs of the neighborhood above his own to actually make a quality development. So thank you, I do appreciate it.
My recommendation from my planning experience is to include chicanes or bulb outs right where the crosswalk would go across Mill Creek for the pedestrian trail. You don't necessarily have to have a raised crosswalk if you just do stripes and bulb outs. That makes it safe for cyclists who are crossing Mill Creek and for kids crossing Mill Creek to have a little bit of extra space to look both ways. And it also signals for traffic to slow down a little bit. So that's actually a pretty important consideration that costs a little bit more for the development, but I think it's pretty important that we do the crosswalk correctly.
I agree. I think it's important also that our public works director and our city engineer, that it works from a city street standpoint. But I totally agree with you. There are lots of different ways to slow traffic down and lots of different methods we can look at.
Okay.
Where you can have the buses stop.
Brian?
That's a problem.
I would like to make a motion that we approve.
Can I just make a quick comment? I think there's been a lot of confusion about the public hearing and public notice in the process, and I just want to make sure that everyone knows that you can email or write a note or drop it at the city at any time that we will all read. This will likely be off of our desks after this, but city council still has final approval of it. This is the official public hearing, so it goes through that process, but you can, Nora is excellent. We get emails forwarded to us seconds after they come to her, to the general planning address, and city council also gets those at the same time. So like if there are questions that came up tonight that you have now after hearing the developer speak or hearing the discussion, you can send those along, and this is not the final stop, and this is only the preliminary plat approval, so there's a lot more steps to go. Yeah.
And I would also like to first thank you all for speaking, and second, I hope that you, members of the village PUD, can still work with and talk with the developer and with the Mill Creek Canyon Collaborative. And if you guys can all work together, I think this can turn out to be something that is very valuable for the locals here who can hopefully afford to buy a house. So that's what I'm hoping, is y'all can keep working together and keep compromising on things that you think are important. And again, this is not the final stage for the city either, so keep that in mind.
Brian?
Well, I'd just like to make a motion that we approve the preliminary plat. So shall I go ahead and read this? I move to approve the preliminary plat for the Abdi subdivision located on Powerhouse Lane and Mill Creek Drive, consisting of 66 single-family lots, 16 twin home lots, and 4 estate lots. Prior to the final plat approval, the following conditions must be met. Number 1, the city engineer shall review and approve all subdivision improvements, including street improvements and storm drainage. Number 2, the final plat submittal will have to include landscape and irrigation plans for review and approval. Number 3, the final plat submittal will have to include details and specifications for all trails and open space, including the creek trail. Number 4, the 20-foot wide easement shown on the preliminary plat shall be modified to be a road intersection with Mill Creek Drive. Number 5, a maximum building height and setbacks will be subject to the requirements of the underlying zones. Number 6, the final plat shall include language that construction can occur within the floodplain, but that a finished floor elevation shall minimum elevation for the floodplain. Number 7, the development will be required to execute a subdivision improvement agreement at the time of the final plat approval. And number 8, can I take that?
Yep. Sorry if you can't read my handwriting.
You can, I can. The developer will work with the city staff to address the pedestrian crossing and calm traffic on Mill Creek Drive to satisfy the city engineer.
Okay, I have a motion.
All right.
Do I have a
Second.
second? Have a second? All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Passes unanimously. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Who was the second? I'm sorry.
Corey.
Corey.
I mean, I know everybody was. But. Thank you, everybody, for participating. And most of you have my email address at this point, so feel free to communicate with me, and I will pass that communication along.
Okay, next item on the agenda is a discussion about moving forward with the zoning for overnight accommodations.
Doing number 8.
Nora, can we keep this short?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Definitely. You guys did awesome. Okay.
I don't need them. No.
Good job, everybody.
Okay, I have not had a chance to look at Nora's breakdown of city council and the joint meeting, so I'm riding in the dark here.
That Tuesday meeting, did you miss it? Okay.
No, I just haven't read Nora's summary.
So, just as a general note, my last name does not have an I after F.
You know, that's sort of what I
It happens
thought,
so much.
but
I'm so used to it,
all
but
the stuff I've seen is that way.
How do you spell
Okay,
your,
thank you.
KY what?
it's Marion Feld, not Marion Field, even though it does mean field in German, so it's very confusing.
And I have 2 L's in my name.
Oh, yes, you do.
Did I blow that too?
Gosh, Nora.
Unspelled correct.
This is the airing of the grievances with
Oh,
spelling.
that's fine. No, I usually put 2 L's in, but I have to tell you, I started this like last week, after the meeting, and then my whole world sort of turned to Abbey subdivision
Right.
and some other things going on. So I really wanted to have this out to you before today, and I apologize for that.
All right.
But it is what it is, right? So these are the, let me get out of this. I don't really need all this. These are really draft notes from the City Council Planning Commission Joint Work Session. And what I've done here is organize them by individual. And then the next step really is to kind of, and we can talk about this, the next step is sort of to figure out where we have consensus and to move forward. I think it was a really productive work session, and I'm glad you all participated and that you all heard each other. So I think, you know, there are various differences of opinion about where we should start, whether it should be the North Corridor or whether it should be the downtown core. Those undeveloped parcels are kind of in Never Never Land now. There's a lot of, I know both Allison and Jeanette want to do something, but they want to do it right and not necessarily have to rush through something. And I think Kaylin shared your concerns, and probably one of the other council members too. Start with smaller projects. We talked about trying to come up with standards for a smaller project so that we have kind of boutique hotel in between, mixed use. That might be a good starting point because the big ones will come, but we want to be able to review and approve something, and the development standards for the big hotels might take a little bit more on the northern end, so that's something to think about. The mayor continues to be to support the community living challenge. She doesn't think we should apply for certification, but she thinks a lot of those principles should be reflected in our development standards, and I think we can. So there was discussion about overlays versus just having the regulations in the zoning. I continue to recommend having them in the zoning itself, just because from a experience standpoint, people like to know what they can do most of all, what they can and can't do. And if you put it in black and white,
To understand.
in the zoning, then at least they may not like it, but at least they know what to do rather than having to flip to a different section. And the county's approach on overlays, where it actually takes 2 legislative acts, 1 to create the overlay and 2 to apply it to a specific parcels, that sends appraisers and real estate folks and everything else into fits because they don't know what the value of the property really is because it's totally discretionary. The Planning Commission does want a fair amount of discretion, and I understand that, but it also needs to be predictable. So as we move forward, that's kind of the direction I'm going. There are a couple people who want the overlay approach.
Well, just
but I
one.
think everybody else does it.
There was just one.
Yeah, although I've been having a lot of email conversations with another city council person who's starting to lean toward the overlay.
So the 4 in favor is no longer?
I don't know, it's still out there.
I really like that. I mean, I thought our suggestion on that was great. Wasn't that yours?
Yeah, I agree. No, I think it's.
Did they have their meeting up north in regard to this? Weren't they meeting? Are they all
It's right
going up
now.
North?
Yeah, they're, so Joel and probably Emily and I don't know who all else.
Was it
is
this week?
in- They're in Salt Lake City right now.
Okay.
during
I was just wondering if we
intercession.
had a report back on how that went.
Haven't heard a word. They're still there. They just went yesterday. So, yeah, that will be interesting. And we don't want it to cripple us, but we also need to be mindful of the state legislature. So I don't know if you guys want to talk more about this or what your impressions were. And my next step will be to actually start drafting development standards. I have a meeting with the county, with Zachariah on Monday, and then we are also going to be at a conference together next week. So hopefully we can talk more in terms of coordination. We've both been just slammed, but it needs to happen, so.
So are we wanting to put together some time for us to go over all the ideas that we want to put forward
Yeah.
for this what would you describe, the ordinances? The ordinances we want to put in place?
Yeah, development standards.
Okay, development standards. So we just need to find the time and what to
I
do.
feel like we need a workshop rather than crunching it in and after a meeting.
I totally agree.
I'd like to
Oh, yeah.
2 or 3 hours on a Saturday afternoon.
Saturday.
On a Saturday, I'm sorry.
I don't think it
my
needs to
only
be a
day off.
Saturday, that's my
No.
only day off too.
No, but I'm already working 9-hour days.
No, yes, that's true.
I feel like I need to do some legwork first, because I don't want to just throw all this stuff at you and then say, okay, tell me what you want to do.
But I do think, Nora, that at least it would help me if you could come up with some starting points for us. So some starting points for where we can take the development standards in general, I suppose.
Yeah, I agree.
And then we can kind of refine them and tune them and add to them. But
Sure.
I do need a starting point because I feel like I'm lost in all of this. There is so much here for me that I can't even begin to wonder where I'm going to start.
That's sort of where I've been.
But I have a question, or maybe a statement, but can we come up with 4 or 5 basic things to focus on instead of try to spread a whole bunch of dozen of things?
I agree. I think it needs
I
to be
agree.
simplified, and I think we need to break it down per zone and apply the things that are appropriate for each different zone or area in the, I don't know. I'm not-
Breaking into areas and then addressing them.
Yeah, like Northern Corridor is completely different
Right.
from downtown. They're tiny little
Yeah.
slices
Right.
everywhere. Northern Corridor is huge parcels, like the
And that's-
trailer parking is obviously not going to apply downtown, but it will
that's-
apply north of downtown. You know, if we could simplify like mixed use, density, parking. What else was there?
Yeah, I would recommend looking at density as our primary indicator of like what's the size of the project that we're willing to take on, as in like the number of units that we want to start with. Like, do we want to start by planning an area that could possibly accommodate 500 units, or do we want to start with 50, or do we want to start with 100? And let's start talking about like the size of development that we want to create as like the ideal living community, hotel, resort, mixed use kind of place.
That
Take
comes
like
back
5
to the-
things and break it down per each zone
And
and
that's
make,
what comes back to the boutique hotels. I think if we start small, then we can keep applying those ideas as we get bigger.
Yeah, and then where's the place? If you want to create a 50-unit place, where do we want to start in town? We want to start on Main Street, south of town, north of town?
Does the city council have priorities, I wonder? Do they have things that they want to see us focus on?
Yeah.
Could we get those?
Well, that's what these
well, that's what
notes.
we kind
I
of
mean,
did.
those
I
are
know,
those
and I read-
basic,
I
those
read through
basic
that.
direction things that
Yeah,
I think
this
we
would be
still
nice.
Yeah,
need
but
like
it's-
like
concrete
traffic.
answers on.
Well, like they want
Maybe-
us to
maybe traffic's one.
they want us to reintroduce hotels, which is where all of our ideas came from in this. So I think the priority is us deciding how and where to reintroduce hotels.
Eventually,
I think
yeah.
that's accurate.
I agree. And the city council's kind of all over the place too, a little bit.
Yeah, they are.
But, you know, transit is a really big thing for them. They, you know, having
Landscape,
water-wise landscaping
Yeah.
and using
And
gray
I think that's
water
great for big
Height-
projects. Like,
Height and massing, I think, is important to everyone.
yeah.
You still want to be able to drive down Main Street and see the Red Rock. And maybe there are places where additional height is appropriate under certain circumstances.
and I think the architectural point is a good point.
Yeah, it is.
I mean,
It is.
it's true. We don't want to see a square box.
So,
Yeah.
so can we start with the boutique hotel idea with something very small, 25 units or less, and then build that code and then move out?
Yeah.
Would that be a way for us to start anyway?
I don't think it matters the number of rooms. It matters if it's a small one or a large one. It all applies.
And that's what I'm not sure about. Do we care about lot size or number of units on that lot? And I don't know what would be a better way to talk about these things.
Well, most of the development standards would probably apply to both in some respects, but if it's the desire of the Planning Commission to City Council to first just tackle the smaller ones, and then after the first of the year, start looking at the bigger parcels, that is certainly an option.
Okay.
There are also some people who want to start in the north, but I think in anticipation of new developments coming in and how to respond to those. But I think it's, if we start, I don't know, I mean, if we start with a smaller one, kind of go through what development standards we think are important, then we can move from there.
And that's what I'm hoping. And I suppose now that I think about it, I would talk about lot size and not number of units, because boutique hotels could have rooms the size of this space. And
Well, we could also say you can't put a hotel in a lot that's X big.
Exactly.
Like, it has to be a small lot hotel.
so let's start talking about small lots and what we would like to see on them, and then we can branch out from there.
And then also, since we're going to incorporate mixed use, the area that we select, I think we should choose one that's economically up and coming, where we already have business there. So it's going to attract local business owners to develop out those mixed use spaces, because we can zone anything, but we have to zone a spot that already has incentive to build.
But just remember that we are writing code for the entire zone that we have on our zoning map. We aren't building code for this lot and then this lot and then
I
this
thought we were
lot.
going to break it down by area, like C3, C2,
Exactly.
RA1.
Makes the most sense.
So, yeah, so we have to design standards for C2, not for the lot over on 100 and North and,
Right.
Yeah.
whatever it is. But
Actually, I think that's a really good way to look at it, because basically that will satisfy my wants or whatever, as far as tackling some of the stuff that we need to get tackled in the downtown on a smaller level.
Okay.
Well, I think, go ahead. I was wondering if, we even think that those zonings are even appropriate anymore, because when you take hotels out, it might change it from a C1, 2 to a 3,
And that's a whole nother issue.
Yeah, and I've gotten a number of people from the public who, as a part of this, want to change from residential to commercial zoning, and it's like, that's not really what we're doing right
No,
now,
we don't want to do that.
but
No, thank you.
I think we should keep in mind too, we're not working on this yet, but about the community node centers kind of that we talked about. That's really the best and most appropriate place for places like what Emily was suggesting, daycares and dry cleaners. I don't really think those belong in the first story of a hotel.
no, they don't.
I wouldn't want to drop my kid off at a hotel to get babysat.
Yeah.
So we need to think about that too, as far as, do we need to require mixed use on every single
And different kinds of
space?
mixed use.
Right.
Yeah, like maybe on the North Corridor, it's more appropriate for just restaurants and outlets,
Yeah.
not
Tourist
community.
oriented.
Good point.
Locals aren't going to drive there to do.
And I think that comes back to our zones, and I
Right.
planning on small lots in C2, then we can designate what kind of retail or what kind of mixed use we would
Yeah,
like.
right.
C2 and
move out.
C3 are great for
They are.
mixing that.
Totally.
Yeah.
Yes.
Nora, you
And-
brought up service fees last time, that we can add those on to hotel developments, like a community service amount that would go into like community service districts. You brought that up last time.
Fees?
I don't know exactly what you were thinking, but like ways to get more areas for things like daycares and laundromats.
Yeah.
What were you talking about with that?
The nodes, really.
Okay.
So a mixed use in the C5. C5, we don't allow overnight accommodations, period. But one of the other zones, try to, like the C2, try to require in that zone the kinds of mixed use commercial uses that can most benefit the neighborhood where it's in, where the C2 and C3 are. So we can certainly do that, and those areas would be oriented, especially the C5, toward community service needs. And unbeknownst to me, but I found out yesterday, that Landmark is working on the community nodes plan, which I didn't even know.
Yeah, we talked about it in our meetings with them.
Right. I mean, we talked about it back then. I didn't know they were doing any work actively.
Yeah.
Apparently they are. So that's a good thing.
That's good.
Okay, so future agenda items?
We have a couple public hearings, not at this next meeting, but at the following one. One is on a rezone for the Creekside, I think it was called Creekside Townhomes or something. It's off of Cane Creek Road. There's a big hillside,
Right.
and then there's a little flat piece, and they were gonna tuck some condos in there. They have decided that it's not economically feasible to do that, given construction costs. So they're asking for a rezone to C3, so they can put in like a tunnel car wash.
Are you kidding?
Yeah, a drive-through.
Yeah, drive-through. So, just saying, that's there. I have told them all along, I have no idea
Okay.
as to the council's.
Is that the one that backs up to Burger King, right?
I don't.
No,
This is further up.
it's right up by the workforce services.
Did we already approve that plan?
Is that it?
It is?
Burger
Yeah.
King one,
Okay.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
which we did approve.
Oh, that seems like
Yeah,
a
we
good
approved
spot.
it.
Yeah, you
That
did
was
there.
one
And
with
they're-
your
and then
water
they
next
backed
to
out.
it, right? You had
They
water next
decided
to
it
that?
didn't make financial sense for them to do
They
that.
decided it was too expensive or something.
Can we have a new zone that's like IN1, which is literally just for Indian restaurants?
Yes.
Chinese.
On top of the car wash.
I think that's an overlay that's all over
Yeah,
town.
you open one on top of car washes.
Okay, is there anything else that needs to be discussed for the good of the commission? It is a school night, ladies and
I
gentlemen.
know.
Let's go home.
Indian restaurant.
That was my humor breakup of the discussion, Allison. You're welcome.
Is there anything else that needs to be discussed for the good of the commission?
Thank you all. You did a great job tonight. Awesome.
Thank
If
you,
not, I
Nora.
Thank you,
adjourn
Nora.
the meeting at
Nora, thank
8:06. We are done, 8:06.
It's like, leave.
I gotta face 120 teenagers
So glad.
tomorrow.
They can do car wash.
Catch up
Thank
on
you
all
for
the
being a
things I-
teacher.
Face 120 teenagers tomorrow.